Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the California ISO Resource Adequacy Modeling and Program Design. Today's special meeting, we are calling it Office Hours with the CAISO RA Processes and the CPUC Slice of Day. My name is Brenda Corona on behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group. I welcome you to this meeting as this meeting is going to be recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As this collaborative office hours is intended to kind of stimulate open dialogue and discussion, we will have the panelists be helping out guide those discussions, and they'll be able to introduce themselves at the time of their time when they're discussing. But I just want to remind those folks that we have about 2 hours for this call, so we'll do our best to take advantage of the whole time. And then we do have an upcoming meeting that will be for next week. Unfortunately, that meeting will come up to become a virtual meeting. We will be sending out a notice today or tomorrow that will show that this meeting will be virtual at this time for the Resource Adequacy Modeling and Program Design Working Group. So that one was scheduled on the 16th. That was from 9 to 4. So that right now we are going to be planning for virtual. Just want to give everyone a heads up on that. And then for recent changes of the WebEx, we do have a few changes that just happened for 2024. One of them is the Call Me feature that's no longer offered, but right now we're closely working with the Inteller Group to make sure we can bring that back because we are experiencing technical issues within the audio and the other lines. So we want to make sure those are all working well for all stakeholder calls moving forward. But we appreciate those who are on the call. If you do experience any technical issues, make sure to send us a chat to my event producer Silas or myself. We'll make sure to kind of review those. And if you are asking a question on chat, make sure you state your affiliation as well. And also when you're speaking and your hand is raised, we'll also give those instructions right now on how to make sure if you ask a question. So for the raise hand, you will be selecting that lower toolbar. It'll let us know who likes to ask a question, but make sure you do not unmute yourself while you have your raised hand. Make sure you're fully addressing your whole question before muting yourself, because if you do mute yourself while you're asking your question, you won't be able to unmute yourself. So we'll have to do that double muting and re-adding you back to the queue. And then for those who are signed in through the audio only, press #2, and Silas will let me know who has questions, and also please state your full name and affiliation to do so. But other than that, just a reminder for the mute function, if you are speaking, there is an arrow on the toolbar, and make sure you're selecting the correct device. If you're using a headset, make sure it corresponds to that same brand, and make sure the speaker audio is connected well to the speaker, because it does distribute the difference between a speaker versus a microphone if you're using WebEx computer only. And then with that, I do want to give update for those on the call. We have to remind that everyone, there is maybe a few commissioners and advisors from State Public Utility Commission on this attendance, so make sure just keep a note on that. And then I'll go ahead and introduce Ansel, who is on video right now, and I will double check on his audio if he wants to go over the objectives for today's meeting. Go ahead, Ansel.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Thanks again, Brenda, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm excited to take some time today to talk about the California ISO's resource adequacy processes and the CPUC slice of day. We're going to take these 2 hours to kind of touch on a document that was just posted by the ISO, as well as the main focus of the meeting will be to spend some time taking questions from stakeholders that may not have been answered in our November working group, or that we may have wanted to follow up on, and also to discuss any outstanding questions as well. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the team that we have here. So we're joined in the room here by Partha Malvadkar, who is our Principal of Resource Adequacy. We also have Christy Sanada, our Senior Manager of California Regulatory Affairs. And all right, thank you, Silas. Let's see I'm going to start over here. I think some of what I said was cut out, but I think we're back. So, so today's objective is to take a look and review the slice of day implementation document that was just posted by the ISO. And then we're going to open the floor to questions from stakeholders to clarify any outstanding questions. We held a slice of day workshop in November of 2023 to discuss some key highlighted items as we anticipate slice of day implementation coming soon. And so looking forward to getting some more questions answered today. And I'm going to go ahead and do our introductions again to make sure everyone knows who we have here. So we have Partha Melvadkar today, our Principal of Resource Adequacy, and we are joined by Christy Sanada, Senior Manager of California Regulatory Affairs. We also have in the room Abdul Muhammad Ali, who is our Resource Adequacy Manager for Operations Engineering. And on the phone, in addition to Brenda, we're joined by Catalin Mixa, who is our Senior Advisor for Transmission Infrastructure Planning. And we're also joined by David Zlotlo from our legal team. I'm also excited to share that we are jointly hosting this meeting with the Public Utilities Commission, Energy Division, and their Resource Adequacy and Procurement Oversight team. So Jamie, would love to hand it over to you to introduce your team. Jamie Rose Gannon has joined us, who is the manager of the RA Procurement Oversight team.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Ansel. I'm happy to attend or be on this call with the CAISO staff, and we've been working closely to coordinate on various slice of day related issues, questions as they've popped up. So we've been part of writing the document and appreciate the close collaboration with CAISO staff on this front. So today I'm joined by my senior analyst, Kelsey Choing, who is helping to implement the slice of day framework. And I'm also joined by Elijah Cohen, who is also assisting and supporting in these efforts. So I'll pass it back to you, Ansel.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And thanks, Kelsey and Elijah, for joining us today. I think I'll just reiterate what Brenda shared earlier, just as a quick related announcement, that our Tuesday working group for the broader resource adequacy modeling and program design will be virtual only. So we hope you can join us for that discussion as well. But for today's meeting, we're framing this as an office hours conversation, so it's going to be mostly open format. We hope that folks can share their questions. We had a lot of questions in the November 2023 working group on slice of day, and we're hoping that we have addressed some of those in the document that we share this week. But any outstanding questions we can review at this time. So a little bit about the document. Brenda has shared the links to that in the chat. If you haven't seen it yet, it was just posted earlier this week. It's relatively brief, but we hope that it provides good insight on interactions between the CPUC's upcoming slice of day RA framework and our CAISO RA processes and the near-term implementation there. The document does have a few answers to key stakeholder questions that we heard in November and provides some additional examples for RA showings regarding QC values that we receive at the ISO, as well as our RA showings process and our additional processes in our RA program based on the forthcoming slice of day framework. So again, I know that was just released, but would be happy to answer questions or review that document today. So, and finally, we just hope this is a time for us to provide access to our teams at CAISO and the CPUC Energy Division and answer questions related to these processes that we're discussing today. So that kind of concludes my opening remarks today. Jamie, if you have anything to add, please do. But otherwise, I think we can just go ahead and take some time and open the floor to folks if you'd like to raise your hand or put questions in chat, and we can kind of take those as they come today.
Amy, you're on mute. Just a reminder to ask a question, click on the raise hand icon and we will announce. Oh, so we got one question, Thomas. Please be sure to state your full name and affiliation. Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you so much. I see I'm unmuted now. My name is Tom Popick. I'm with the Foundation for Resilient Societies. We're a nonprofit that advocates for reliable electric grids. I have been familiar in the past with the net qualified capacity framework for California ISO. And my previous understanding, for example, for solar PV, was that there was a technology factor that was applied to the gross capacity or nameplate capacity, and that technology factor was constant for all hours of the day. And it appears that you've moved to a new framework where on the peak hour of a day, there will be a certain capacity that is shown as qualifying capacity. I'm wondering, can you explain to me, have I got the essence of that correctly?
Tom, this is Abdul Muhammad Ali. Yeah, you got the essence correctly of the existing process. I think the new process is essentially, from the CAISO's perspective, is essentially the same process where we will be using, for established resources, we'll be using peak hour exceedance-based methodology from the PUC to establish a single static monthly NQC value. For new resources, I'm not aware of change or moving away from the tech factors. So we should have technology factors developed, and Jamie and PUC team, correct me if I'm wrong, but there should still be technology factors. The methodology might change for wind and solar on how they develop those tech factors. But for the CAISO perspective, for new resources coming online, we'll still use those tech factors.
Okay, very good. So you're saying essentially the peak hour exceedance is just for existing resources, is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay, very good. So then I have a related question, and it concerns electric vehicles. So I dare say that the majority of EV charging in California right now is home charging, and so it takes place in the evening hours, and it actually contributes to the evening peak. However, if the public-facing chargers were actually in good order, and if there were enough of them, and I should say that the Biden administration just announced today more public charging support, then the demand from public charging would take place starting around 9 o'clock in the morning, extending into midday hours. It could use a lot of that renewable solar PV energy. And so that energy from solar panels would actually have a lot of value that doesn't come at the peak hour of the day. And I'm wondering if there is success in getting public EV charging during midday hours, how would that work its way into this new methodology you have for the peak hour and the exceedance?
I think I'll defer to Jamie and team on that question. I think it's related to their methodology.
Yeah, and maybe not so relevant for this discussion, was just about implementing the existing framework. It sounds like that would require something new for a new type of resource, or new accounting rule to a new type of resource. But Jamie and team, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Could you maybe repeat the question again, just so we can
well certainly. So
yeah.
So let me say that Stanford University has done studies of what the charging profiles are for EVs. And there's really two distinctive profiles. One is a home charging profile where the demand peaks around 9 p.m. and the reason for this is that people get home, say around 6 or 7 p.m., and they plug in their EV, and as people come home more and more people plug in their EVs, and so you get this charging profile that really is between, say, 9 p.m. at midnight. It peaks around then. But then there's an alternative charging profile if people take their EV to work, and there's a charging station at work, or they're out doing errands and they can charge while they're out doing errands, or maybe they're even traveling on a interstate or that kind of thing. They can charge on the interstate. Those charging profiles tend to peak in the middle of the day. Actually, they peak in the morning hours. And so it just seems to me that the way you have, if I understand correctly, with the exceedance value, right? It's like a single value over the course of the day. But what I'm trying to say is that with solar PV, that might actually have great value for resource adequacy at times other than the peak hour. And that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I could help a little bit and we could discuss further, but so my understanding is maybe the EV charging aspect, it will influence the hourly load forecast that'll be used in setting the RA requirements. So you would see that value proposition for solar change, maybe with the incorporation of the EV charging behavior that you're laying out.
Okay. Well, yeah.
That said, I would imagine that it would have to be incorporated into the reference load forecast in order to get at that. Am I missing your question? Because
No, I think this has been very helpful to me indeed. And let me just say, current EV penetration in California is about 3%. And until the EV penetration gets into the double digits, I don't think this is going to be an issue. But I just I wanted to see how you folks are thinking about these things. I'm new to your group. This is the first time I've attended, but I do research in this area, and I've been encouraged so much already by just looking at your slides and your documentation and that kind of thing. And I think I foresee being a more regular participant. So thank you so much for addressing my question, and I think you did answer it, and I look forward to being in touch with you folks in the future.
Yeah, and one more thought. I just heard something when you said one value for all the slices. So underneath the future slice of day, it would actually be at the CPUC, we would be looking at a 24-hour production profile for that solar resource. So we would be counting it towards resource adequacy, for the hourly requirements. I know at CAISO, there's still just that one value that would be used on their side, but on the CPUC side, there is that full 24-hour profile that would then count towards that 24-hour load.
Excellent. Yes. That is such a helpful elaboration. And now I'm starting to understand that the California Public Utility Commission has a different methodology than California ISO. And that's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we appreciate the question, and thank you, Jamie, for following up there. I think we definitely want to try to really focus today's conversation on kind of specific resource adequacy showing and process questions. So we'll have contact information at the end of the slides. We can follow up with some additional questions that may be on folks' minds. So I don't see any other hands right now, unless Silas, do we have any? Oh, great. We have a hand from Adeline, I think from PG&E.
Adeline, your line is now unmuted. You can go ahead. Adeline, you may need to make sure that your headset is unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, so yeah, Adeline with PG&E. We actually have a quick clarifying questions. So on page 3, and it's like something that was not discussed a lot last time we have this conversation. So it's regarding the array imports. In case of like solar resources, where eventually the NQC value the CAISO will be using will be 0.1 megawatts. In the white paper, you state that the array import shown on supply plans must be paired with the corresponding amount of mix. So just wondering what will be the mix amount in this case? And eventually, if CAISO could slightly update the paper with providing like clear example on how it will work with mix, because there are a couple of confusions here. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, Adeline. This is Abdul. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the plan is to, as we do today with all imports, they're limited by the import capability that the LSC secures on the intertie where the import resource is coming from. Whether it's the import of solar or any other type of resource, the cap from the CAISO perspective is on the import capability that the LSC has secured and reserved on the intertie the imports coming from. So that's how we're doing it today, and we'll continue to do it that way when in the RA submissions and the RA showings validation. Separately, you know, how do you want that? How would that count as a PUC? Might be a little bit different, but you know, just to let you know how we're doing it when in relation to MIC. Basically, it's the same as we're doing it today. So they're not on the NQC list. I should clarify. Those imports are not on the CAISO's NQC list. We don't assign NQC for imports, so we're limiting them to the import capability on the intertie by the LSC. Go ahead. Sorry, I think I cut you off there.
Yeah, no. So basically, what you mean here is like by RA import shown on the supply plan is kind of the contracted value or contracted amounts that the LSCs have signed for the import contract that should be paired with the same amount of MIC?
It doesn't have to be the same, and it doesn't have to be the full contracted amount. I think from the CAISO's perspective, we expect the LSCs to show enough RA capacity to meet their obligation. That doesn't mean they have to show the full contracted amount on all their resources. They show as they see fit to meet their obligation. That's true in this case as well. The only thing we're saying is the maximum you can show from an import resource is capped at the import capability that is secured by the LSC or assigned to the LSC on that specific intertie.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Abdul. And if you mentioned the white paper, you know, if we can be in touch with an example, I think we could discuss that kind of one-on-one, if that would be helpful to just make sure that we have a good understanding there. So thank you.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
All right. I think next we have Brian in a queue with his hand up.
This is Brian Thaker with Middle River Power. I'll apologize in advance. The question I'm going to ask is fairly nebulous, but given the RA horsepower from both the PUC and the ISO on the call, it just seems like an opportunity to ask this question. So my question is this for both the ISO and for the PUC. What do you think are the things that are necessary for you guys to do to be ready for slice of day implementation for RA compliance year 2025? And if it's more than one, how do you propose to prioritize those things?
Jamie, would you like to take that one first, and then we can follow?
Sure. Okay. I wasn't really prepared to answer this question in this menu, but I think that, you know, we have to get personally, I think that we have to get the issues resolved with the templates so that LSCs are comfortable populating the templates, and we worked through some of the quality control issues that we're still kind of seeing. And I think parties probably saw this in informal comments. I think also, we need to nail down, the master resource database, the parameters that feed into compliance, and a process for making sure that we are updating that with regular Canvas and it's flowing into the monthly templates in time for LSCs to make their showings. So I think that's the biggest thing I see. I think there's other things probably we need to work through, but that would be the biggest thing in my mind. And I'm also going to maybe punt it over to Kelsey or Elijah, if they have other thoughts to add. I might have missed some.
I would just add that we're trying to really nail down the PRM, like what's the right PRM for 2025. So I know several parties have submitted comments. Thank you for that. But that's something I view as really important.
Okay, Jamie, thank you, and Kelsey, thank you. I appreciate that. It sounds like those are the second one sounds like it's more regulation focused than process focused. So I guess a follow-on question before I turn to the ISO with the same question I just asked is, do you think that most of the things that remain to be done are process items that don't require the commission to act, or do you think that the commission still has unresolved decisions that they need to make before we can get to successful implementation of the program in 25?
I think it's more the former. It's more process oriented. Yeah, I think it's more the former. But I will add that, I hope to clarify for purposes of this call today that, the RA program today we base our compliance program off, the verification that we receive from supply plans that are submitted by generators to the CAISO through the SERA system. And that will be still an integral part of our compliance program under slice of day, even though we'll be using, a master resource database rather than the NQC list to validate other parameters of the showings. It's still, a vital kind of aspect of confirming that supply has been committed for a RA showing that shows up in our space. So just want to clarify that.
Okay. Again, Jamie and Kelsey, thank you for the answer. And Abdul, Partha, Christy, if I could may I ask you the same question? What do you guys view as the things that remain to be done before we get to 25? And if there's more than one, how would you prioritize them?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We can definitely take nebulous questions. We can take specific questions and anywhere in between. So I think our sense right now is, and I hope we detailed this a little bit in the white paper, but our sense is that we don't have any major changes that need to take place between now and the next, and in preparation for RA year 2025. Definitely not any tariff changes. I think we've heard, you may have seen some comments suggesting a need to take a look at the BPMs for CAISO's business practice manuals, but our sense right now is that we're not planning to change those. So, we're always open to how folks are seeing it, and if it changes, if folks think changes do need to be made. But right now, we're just kind of coordinating with the CPUC to hear what they're seeing, and I think we're ready for 2025 implementation.
And I'd add, Brian, too, I think that's part of the reason why we're having these conversations as well, is to make sure that there's, you all can flag for us any issues we might miss, clarifications that might be needed, maybe, potentially, BPM changes or clarifications in terms of our process or systems. So yeah, that's sort of part of the reason for these calls. But yeah, thanks for the question, Brian.
Yeah, sure. If I could just follow up with one question that bridges both entities. Kelsey identified that getting a PRM for 2025 is still an outstanding item, and I agree with that. If I can ask the ISO team, do you have any particular thoughts about the direction and what we ought to be doing with regard to the 2025 PRM that you'd be willing to offer up here?
At least one suggestion, Brian. This is probably a longer conversation. We have comments that we've submitted to the PUC in various forums, but I would suggest we probably want to stick a little more to the mechanics around the ISO's programs and sort of how the mechanics of how they'll work effectively with the PUC's programs. But that would be my recommendation.
And maybe a technical kind of response to you, Brian, is we, as you probably know, we use the PRMs that are developed by the CPUC and the LRAs. So that's it's their kind of jurisdiction, and we basically defer to them on that. So from our perspective, we have a mechanism to consume their PRM and validate the showings based on that. So that's why, to Ansel's point, we think we're ready. They just need to tell us what the PRM would be if it needs to be changed. Obviously, we already have PRMs in the systems from them, but if it needs changes or reevaluation, whatever they tell us the PRM is, essentially we'll respond. And we're, Christy and team, we have a process to follow up and campaign at the PUC's RA process to give ideas about where the PRM should be. I don't know, Christy, if you want to add anything on that?
Yeah.
Good to go. Ryan, does that make sense? Any?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I lobbed in a pretty high-level, obnoxious question. Thank you for responding to it, and thank you for holding these office hours and making the key folks available. Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, I think still not seeing any questions in chat, but we have Chris Devon is next in the queue with his hand up.
So your line is unmuted. You can go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me? This is Chris Devon.
Yep. Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hi. Yeah, Chris Devon, TerraGen. Thanks for the opportunity. I was reviewing the paper, and I wanted to thank you guys for the thinking that you've done on some of these issues. It does appear that you were responsive to one of the issues that I raised in the last call on the shorter than 4-hour duration storage item. So I wanted to thank you guys for thinking about that. It makes more sense to me now after reading your response that basically the 4-hour duration is still going to be the cap on that NQC. That was really what I wanted to make sure I understood. So I did want to just mention that. No real question there. I think my understanding with how I hoped it should go is aligning with what's being said there in that part of the white paper. So thanks for that. And then the other item I was just curious on with regards to the solar counting after reading the paper and thinking about it a little bit here was related to this counting difference between the CAISO and the CPUC. And I just wanted to maybe flag another issue to think a little bit about potentially. Or maybe just ask if you guys have thought about it, which is to say, again, it's kind of maybe a little bit of a sensitive subject here because it's related to PRM. Obviously, I think if the PRM, potentially doesn't change enough to reflect that counting convention that's being done at the CAISO based on the net load peak period hour, which is, significantly lower than the current ELCC value, then there is a potential that some LSCs may have to either appear that they may not have enough resources. I think that would be the worst case scenario. But I think, and then maybe that might lead to a need to CPM or something. But I think CAISO has some guidance and leeway in their directives to be able to avoid that problem. But the other one that I was a little bit more focused on was what happens if, for instance, this this new exceedance value and 24-hour shaped profile that's used for solar, results in the CPUC showing to be adequate, but then the CAISO showing to be inadequate because of that big difference there. And I think in some months it might be more pronounced than others. And I guess what I'm hoping we can avoid is a situation where an LSE appears compliant to the CPUC and then comes in and does their showing to CAISO, and then all of a sudden has to add more resources, or for some other reason has to adjust their showing with different resources to meet the CAISO requirements. So let me stop there for a second, see if you guys understood that long, drawn-out question.
Understood. And I guess maybe can you go into a little more detail, Chris, about the solar? You're saying that the solar effects could result in what you're describing passing at the PUC and not at the CAISO? Because I kind of think it may be the other direction slightly, just because of how we're tweaking some of, or how we would kind of bump up the NQC values for solar in essentially winter months when the peak hour exceedance value is 0 for some resources. So
yeah, so I was thinking of
a gap. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't. Go ahead, finish.
I was just asking if you can kind of spell out again where you see a gap.
Okay. Yeah. So got it. Okay. So I think it's, imagine let's just take the current ELCC value in September of 14.4%. So if the fleet of solar is providing 10,000 megawatts of solar, that has 1,400 megawatts, give or take, of actual RA based off of that ELCC factor. That's how it would be shown to CAISO today, right? And then it would also be shown to the CPUC that same way. So in the future, let's say under this new exceedance methodology, it has the shape profile, and in some hours it's much higher than that ELCC factor, in some hours much lower, as just a function of that 24-hour profile. If you guys are using the later in the evening profile, and let's just say for September that new exceedance percentile at that hour is only 2% output level, then that would be you'd only be getting the 200 megawatts from that 10,000 megawatts of solar RA. So I could see an instance where the profile of the overall LSEs look good at the CPUC, but then when they come to CAISO, there's a chance that now they are short by 1,200 megawatts, as opposed to the prior ELCC-based approach. So that was the one I was more focused on, the potential for that outcome happening, than as opposed to the other direction that you were mentioning, Christy.
Okay, got it. So I think, just to kind of walk through the solar example that's in the paper, I think what we were doing is we're going to be like for like in terms of the exceedance value that is used in the peak hour at the PUC, and that would translate over to the CAISO. So we wouldn't be using a different capacity factor essentially in that peak hour than would be reflected in the PUC showing. So that's where we were thinking that the solar should largely align peak hour at the PUC and then showing at the CAISO as well, which would be, the system level reference to the gross peak hour. It's just the deltas that we were, are expecting would be if solar exceedance is 0 in that peak hour, which would happen typically in the winter months. Then you might see a slightly higher counting at the CAISO because we had to bump things up to 0.1. Does that help? We're trying just to pull essentially the exceedance values for wind and solar that are in the gross peak hour at the PUC, and then those values would be used as the basis for the QCs or NQCs at the CAISO.
Okay, well, yeah, that is, so I think that is helpful if it is based on the gross peak hour, but I want to maybe ask Jamie or someone at the CPUC if you could clarify, because my understanding was that was going to be based on the net peak hour, that they would transfer the net peak based hour exceedance values for solar to the CAISO.
Kelsey Hoppin, but no, it is the gross peak hour of the IPRA load forecast, which is also called the, I guess, the managed peak. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Yeah, okay. I think that would be less of a problem then. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Because I think if it was the net load peak, then the scenario that I laid out would be much more likely to happen, I could imagine. Just guessing. But anyways, okay. So yeah, I just, the basis for my question is really just that hopefully this process doesn't end up in a situation where LSCs appear compliant to the CPUC, but not compliant with the CAISO requirements. That's the bottom line, you know, and I think you guys are trying to avoid that, but I just wanted to explore that because it seemed to me that that might be a potential due to this solar related counting issue. But I think I feel a little bit more comfortable now, so I'll let it go for now, but perhaps we'll see, you know, maybe how that works as we, you know, get to the showing timeframes and get some more experience with it. But thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And glad we could get your earlier question addressed as well. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick detour. We have a clarifying question in chat asking about a solar import resource and whether if it has an NQC of 0.1, then it would only need a 0.1 megawatt of MIC to count for RA. And they're confirming that. And I think I'll just clarify that imports do not receive an NQC value, but they do need to have that matching mix. So if the RA value is 0.1, then that's correct. There's a requirement for a matching amount of MIC for that. So hopefully that helps, Rich.
Jamie with the hand raised.
Jamie, do you have a addition there?
Well, maybe just a point of discussion, maybe we could clarify further that there, you know, with specified resources, you know, which do have a resource technology type, and we do provide for a QC value, those can result in, say, a 0.1 value at the, you know, NQC value if the peak is occurring, you know, at a time when the resource is not producing anything. So in those cases, I think, and I think this is in the paper, but maybe if it's not, we would, you know, while the contract amount might be something that doesn't specify 0.1, that's the QC value, and that I think is what we would expect at the MIC level, right? The MIC allocation pairing of that resource.
That's perfect, Jamie. Yeah.
I think Jamie, thank you for that. That's an excellent way of clarifying an existing kind of minor differences in the roles that we have and you guys have. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Okay. We had Lauren from Cal CCA in the queue, and then it looks like her hand has gone down. So Lauren, feel free to raise your hand again, but I'm going to go next to Steve from SoCal Edison.
Hi, this is Steve Keen from Southern California Edison. This is I think you may have just answered this one, but it's one I wanted to follow up on. If you have say an LSC has a out-of-state resource, wind or solar, so that essentially the QC that would show up for, say, August might be 30 megawatts. It's 100 megawatt, let's say it's 100 megawatt solar plant, but the QC that may show up for, you pick a month, October or August, September, just say it's 30. The amount of QC or the amount of MIC that would be required for that would be 30, correct? Not the 100? That's what you were saying?
Yeah, I think we were saying the shown RA would be, if you show us, what did you say, 50 or 30? I lost
30.
30. If you
30.
show us in the annual or monthly showings 30 megawatts, then you need to have import capability of 30 megawatts at least. But there's no QC at the CAISO side for imports. It's at the PUC there are QCs. I think that's what Jamie was saying, that for import, and you gotta follow those as well. So you put the two together, you got a QC from the PUC that's limiting your import, and then at the same time the LSC has to secure import capability for the shown RA amount, and then so you have two caps. You know, I guess if you want to pass both validations of both entities, you want to follow, pay attention to both of these.
Okay, Jamie, can you clarify from the
Yeah.
CPUC's point of view?
Yeah, Steve, I want to make sure I'm understanding your example here. So is this a variable energy resource that has a 24-hour profile, or is this like a block contract that varies by month?
The question I'm asking is assuming it's a variable energy resource located out of state. So
Got it. Yeah.
solar,
So
wind, whatever.
Yeah, so the 30 megawatts of the QC value you're pointing to, it would be based on the hour in which the peak is occurring at. So while
Correct.
we would look for that resource to maybe just be showing up at the QC value, like 30 megawatts, right? With an import allocation for the 30 megawatts, we would still validate the resource across its entire 24-hour profile for that month. So yes, I think the answer is I'm confirming that that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, does Steve, glad we could get that question answered. And I believe there is some information in the paper on page 3 about MIC, and I believe further down as well. So happy to clarify that as needed. So we have a question in chat. The question is, will the CAISO tariff default counting rule for solar and wind change with the implementation of slice of day? The answer to that is no. Our default counting rules remain the same at this time. We will be discussing those in the resource adequacy working group process. So stay tuned for that, but at this time, we won't be making any changes to our own default counting rules. All right, I think next we can move to a question in the queue. It looks like Alan has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yeah, hey, so this is Alan Combs. I work for New Energy Works Consulting. I skimmed the paper, this may or may not be in scope, but is there any instance where some sort of definition of off-peak deliverability with the CAISO is used? And the reason I ask is I help a lot of people in the interconnection process, and the public queue actually has a column that says off-peak deliverability. And I have my view about what that column means, but people ask me, questions based on what it says, and I'm assuming it has no bearing on your ability to show comply with RA even under slice a day. It's all about the NQC you get, which is really the on-peak deliverability assessment.
Hi, Alan, this is Catalin. Yes, you are correct. That has no bearing. Off-peak deliverability has no bearing on the showing.
Right. As a cleanup matter, I really recommend you get rid of that column just because, I don't think it's providing useful information. But okay. The other question is there on the roadmap to go to UCAP in any way with CAISO? I just want to know where that is. Haven't heard about that in a while.
Alan, can I just clarify where was that off-peak deliverability you were discussing there? Is that in a
ISO public queue? You can get it on RIMS. It's right after. I mean, they recently updated the queue, so it shows your allocated TPD, and TPD is, of course, basically your provisional NQC, right? I mean, until you attain COD, right? So, and then it has off-peak deliverability, yes or no, more or less.
Thank you.
And I'm suggesting it's a meaningless column, but for reasons I could, or probably Catalin could explain, but I just wanted to know whether it has any bearing in this implementation.
It has, Alan, this is Catalin. It has no bearing on this implementation, and thank you for bringing it to our attention. We understand it's kind of a useless concept, so we will try to make steps to clear it or, get it to be more clear. But based on exactly what we discussed, it has no bearing on the IS showing. Thanks.
Thanks, Catalin. And Alan, you had a second question?
Yeah, well, I think this is out of scope for this, but is there a plan to bring back a UCAP methodology where your performance under your availability or resource adequacy performance would have a bearing on effectively on your NQC?
Thanks for teeing that up. That's one of the topics that's been discussed, and we had sort of significant feedback from participants in the comments of that broader RA working group discussion about resource counting, about our availability incentive mechanisms, and about UCAP. And so on the 16th, we're going to be providing kind of a high-level description of our existing processes and some of those challenges, as well as a proposed sequencing of discussing issues including UCAP within that broad, within sort of a broader framework of broader changes and sort of different frameworks. So yeah, I think that's sort of a topic that we'll be discussing then.
Thanks,
All
Alex.
right. Thank you. Yeah. All right.
All right. I think up next in the queue, we have a hand raised from Christian Lambert.
Christian, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, this is Christian Lambert with Cal Advocates, and I want to go back to the question about counting for imported VERs, and I have a two-part question for CPUC staff. So I guess the issue that I'm seeing is maybe we just whack-a-mole this issue into the modeling inputs and assumptions, where we have two simultaneous import constraints in Servum, a smaller one for certain hours, but for most hours, 11,040 megawatts, which was presented to parties as representing CAISO MIC minus existing transmission contracts and transmission ownership rights. But that level, if what we're saying today is that level is MIC and IARs, the IARs for VERs now being at their NQC, that's a much lower level than what their, that set of imported VERs generation shape over the slice of day might actually look like. So has the modeling then had this hole in it where in any given hour, say if you have an imported solar resource in the middle of the day, it might actually have a much larger energy import level than that IAR level. And if the IAR level was used to set that simultaneous import constraint, don't we have a problem with the reliability results? And then part B of this question is same but for the IRP, and isn't it potentially worse because the IRP in wanting 10 gigawatts of out-of-state wind, if we're only presuming that expands MIC at the NQC level, aren't we worsening that hole because we don't have the total deliverability for the full generation shape of those new out-of-state VERs?
Hi, Christian. That was a pretty big question that I wasn't really prepared to answer, and I don't have Donald Brooks on the phone, who works on the modeling efforts. So maybe I could attempt to answer it, but it might be a discussion for the future that we might need to talk through and understand a little bit better. I think the important discussion here is about, how, given that we will have an inconsistency in our counting rules between, CPUC will be allowing for a 24-hour counting of variable energy resources, whereas CAISO would still use one value. We needed to, we're adopting that one value and we're calling it, right, the qualifying capacity, or the NQC value. And the NQC for VARs is going to be based on what the peak, the value of that resource at the peak. So we want, and the reason why we need one value is because the whole system in CAISO, is based off that one value. So maximum import allocations need one value. And so that's why that clarification is being made. Is like, we don't expect you to have a higher, maximum import capability allocation to pair your variable energy resource, because, we are expecting it to be at, in this case, say very close to zero during the peak hour or stressed hour. Now, when it comes to modeling, I think like you are raising kind of maybe potential inconsistencies with various things, but my understanding of the modeling assumption is that we constrain the model during the stress system hours to 4,000 megawatts, but it's not 1 hour. It's during stress system hours versus just like the 1 hour. And then we relax that import constraints for all the other hours up to the maximum import capability, although I could be wrong on that front. It might be still subtracting out, existing ETCs and stuff like that. But does that help? I don't know if that helps further the question. I just wanted to provide a response, and I'm happy to talk further and, even get our modeling team engaged if needed.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I appreciate the response. I mean, I think it sounds like we have the same understanding of what is currently in the modeling, and I was really hoping to make the point that in those hours where the simultaneous import constraint is relaxed, if we have today something like an assumption of 4,000 megawatts of unspecified resources and NQC of maybe 2,500 or so from specified resources, you've got 6,500 total against a regular hourly limit of 11,000 or so. But that 6,500, the actual energy associated with that NQC rises and falls with the actual generation shape of those VERs. And since today we still don't have the slice of day, and those are based on ELCCs, we really do need that whole generation shape. And I'm just wondering, as we add more of these imported VERs, are we going to end up seeing that generation shape start to bump up against that 11,000 megawatt limit, perhaps in the middle of the day? And is that a problem?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe Catalin, you could jump in on this front to speak to maybe the impacts of, I guess, changing maybe the methodology. I mean, right now we're using one ELCC methodology, which also has this kind of same issue, right? ELCC is lower at times of the day and higher at times of the day, right? But maybe Catalin can speak to maybe the reliability concern you're raising.
Yeah, so thank you, Jamie. So yeah, we did had some discussions before about this. It's almost no different from internal resources to external resources. So they all get to count with that, NQC value or QC value plus make if it's coming from outside. We wanted to do that, and it was dialed in at that, gross peak, because that's when we believe it's the highest probability to have load shed, right? If you move away from there, yes, you can have more or less resources coming from outside, but since it might not be that stress of a time, yeah, there are areas where they're going to be more congestion, there are areas where they're going to be less congestion. but we would be able to, redispatch around those congestions. And we will probably see those in the economic studies that run, 8760. So we will be able to see where this congestion will be coming from. As for transmission coming from outside, we are actually modeling all these new contracts pretty much the same as we're modeling the internal resources. So we are trying to use the same methodology for approving transmission going forward from the interside. Basically, we will be modeling if it's wind or if it's solar. We will be using the ISO exceedance methodologies in the deliverability studies to make sure that we have enough to make them par with internal resources. But yes, when you make a showing, you only need to make a showing to that QC value in the RA world, and then the rest goes through the real-time market. And yes, there can be some congestion over there depending what area you're coming from. It shouldn't be at the peak time period, it should be some other times.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll let the conversation move on.
Thanks, Christian. Right. We don't have any questions in the queue or in chat. Salas, do we have anyone on the phone line?
There are no hands up on our phone line at this time, but just as a quick reminder to those attendees, you can raise your hand by pressing #2 on our phone line.
Thank you. We did have a question in chat about the working group next week. Just confirming that is the Tuesday working group is now virtual only, and it will not be. There will be no in-person option. So, in case we have a couple of folks thinking about a question, I wanted to kind of point you to the last page of the paper that we posted. It's kind of an additional Q&A section. We covered short duration resources. To Chris's question, we also discussed a little bit about energy only resources and resources that are shown to the CPUC and not shown to the ISO. So there's some good information in there if you were wondering about those questions from November. Those are kind of the main Q&A points that we had to address, in addition to what's in the paper. So. Okay. I'm going to stall a little bit more so that folks can raise their hands if they were waiting for a question, but looks like we don't have any questions remaining at this time. So, oh, I see we do have a hand from Diego in the queue there.
Hey, can you hear me? Am I coming through?
We can, thanks.
Awesome. My name is Diego. I work from NG, or I work at NG. I had a quick question regarding the white paper you guys released yesterday on the example. I'm not sure if you guys have it pulled up, but on example 1, there was 2 batteries being shown, both 4-hour resources, but for some reason, the qualifying capacity of one of the batteries that was sized at 5 megawatts, 20 megawatt hours, the full net qualifying capacity wasn't shown during the peak hour, which was hour 19. I wanted to understand that a little bit more. Maybe I'm missing something, but I was hoping someone could give me some pointers as to why it's only showing 3 megawatts of NQC at hours 17 and 22.
Yes. So this is, if for folks who might have the paper pulled up, if you go to page 5, there's a table in the first example, and there are 2 batteries on the showing example. And I think, Diego, I think you're talking about battery 2. And it looks like, yeah, if in our example, and on the chart on the previous page, it's in the dark blue color. So the point of this, because it's a good question, Diego, in sense of why is it not shown in that hour? I just want to first remind you that the graph and the table are a CPUC showing. So that's sort of a helpful thing to keep in mind. The stack chart on the, oh yeah, I'll repeat the page number. So this is example 1. It starts on page 4 of the paper. There's a bar graph with 24 slices. So yeah, starting with the graph and the table are PUC showing, so that's the slice of day showing example. So the reason we included the dark blue battery 2 not being shown in the peak hour on the CPUC showing was to just emphasize that even though it wasn't shown in the what happens to be hour 19, it should still be shown to the ISO for that month for our monthly showing. So if you go to page 6, you will see that dark blue battery 2 being shown, and that's supposed to represent a CAISO showing.
And just to kind of back it up, so with that context in mind that the graph with all the hours represents like a mock CPUC showing, I think you asked why the battery 2 is kind of spread outside of hours outside of the peak. That is because that is allowed in the CPUC's slice of day showings. So storage can be 4-hour energy from storage can be spread over multiple different hours in the 24-hour showings to help fill gaps in different places. So this was meant to kind of represent perhaps an edge case. This won't occur, I'm assuming it won't happen all the time, but was meant to illustrate in the event that this is the case in a PUC showing, this is what this is what you show to the CAISO for that same portfolio.
A great question. Does that make sense, Diego?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I guess I wasn't processing that these are showings for different entities for the crisis, but yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for answering that.
Of course. All right. I see a hand from Grant as well.
This is Grant Glazer with Emanate Energy. Can you all hear me okay?
We can, thanks.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I want to ask a follow-up that's a slightly different version. So on page 4, I'm looking at this chart, and I want to ask about a different case where, let's say there's a hypothetical, or as a hypothetical example, an LSE shows to the CPUC profile where basically they've used thermal and imports and wind and solar to get 22 of their 24 hours satisfied, and then they use like a 2-hour battery to cover those last 2 hours, one of which happens to be the gross peak, hour 19. Based on CAISO's answer on the last page of this document, I believe that the CAISO RA showing would basically use the 4-hour NQC value of that 2-hour battery for the single hour monthly gross peak showing. So now the bar chart on page 6 would basically have that 2-hour battery, its nameplate, or its P max, but divided by 2. And in that case, it seems like there could be an instance where an LSE has shown that it's adequate to the CPUC, but if they use a battery with a duration of less than 4 hours, anywhere on any of that, or to cover any part of that peak hour, then they might be deficient for CAISO. Is that right? And if so, is there any remedy to that?
So Grant, this is Catalin. I'm not sure I'm following your example very well, but the only thing that you need to remember is it doesn't matter on what hour you use what resource in the PUC showing. All the resources that you use in the PUC showings are RA resources, and you need to show them to the ISO based on the ISO NQC methodology. So it does not really matter how you split those resources among the hours. You can use the resources however you want to among the 24 hours to fill in your load shape. When you show them to the ISO, you have to show all the resources, all those resources that you have on the contract to the ISO based on the ISO QC value.
Okay, that's helpful. I'll double check my framing here and follow up offline if needed, but sounds like I might be misinterpreting how the CAISO is doing this.
Yeah, so just to follow up again, Grant, so I think, yeah, you're pointing to the example where there may be less than 4-hour duration storage resources. And so that is why we kind of called out in the Q&A, you know, how many resources is this actually, battery resources is this actually impacting, where you might get the effect that they're shown for greater than their 4-hour RA value at the CPUC and may have to show, you know, limit to the 4-hour and QC value at the CAISO. So we're acknowledging that that may happen, but I think the number of resources that we're seeing and continue to see come online are not shorter duration than 4 hours. But we'll acknowledge that there are a handful. So that's why I kind of called out what we've seen or what we're seeing in the master resource database so far. And we'll, you know, take a look at some of the tests you're showing to understand the magnitude of, you know, the discrepancies that could arise as a result of these shorter duration resources and how they're shown at the PUC.
Got it. So it sounds like you did confirm that the case I was bringing up could happen, but your assessment is that it's limited in scope and therefore just something we're living with.
Take a look to see, you know, we want to look at some of the tester results to understand if it is an issue or not, a major issue or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Okay, so we have a question in the chat asking if a 2-hour storage resource can qualify for resource adequacy.
So I think as far as like your QC value as a storage resource, that has to be what you can provide for 4 hours continuous. And Jamie, correct me, but I think this is spec'd into the CPUC's rules. But I think the cases that Grant was kind of calling out that we've, you know, mentioned in this document are resources that are registered as, you know, could be a 1-hour resource at the CAISO. So I'll give the example of a 100 megawatt PMAX battery. The maximum RA that they can count for is the 4-hour value, which would be 25 megawatts. But in the market, they could technically be dispatched up to the PMAX of 100 at any instantaneous point in time. So I think those are the cases that we're calling out, not saying that, you know, a 2-hour battery qualifies as RA. It's just, you know, in the CPUC's slice of day showings, the energy from that 4-hour resource could be, as the energy under the 4-hour RA could be spread over or condensed into something different than 4 hours.
Thank you, Christy. Okay. We do have until 3 o'clock blocked off, so I would encourage folks who have questions to share those. We've had some great questions so far. Really glad we can kind of get some clarity on these. All right, I have a question for Perry in the queue.
Perry, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Video CISA. I was wondering if you all had put any thought into the comments that we had on the last call about this related to the situation in which the CPUC could find that all of the load serving entities meet their requirements, but yet CAISO may still engage in backstop procurement. Yeah, I mentioned this because the white paper is pretty scarce in its description of the CPM part of this.
Fail.
So Perry, can you elaborate a little more? This was discussed a little bit earlier about, in general, I think we see it as like we're setting up a design or for 2025. We're having longer term discussions about what reforms might be needed. But like most of the mechanics that we've seen, with this exception of maybe this, less than 4-hour storage issue where that wouldn't be the case. Are there specific examples, Perry, that you're concerned about where that could manifest?
Yeah, I mean, we could just tinker with the numbers of your example number 1 and come up with an example in which the CPUC would determine that the load serving entities are sufficient and meet their requirements. Yet you would show that the total requirement is not met in that gross peak hour, and therefore you would engage in additional procurement and additional cost. Have you all put together an example showing that and what you might do in that sort of instance?
I think, Perry, this is Abdul. So hypothetically, I guess it could happen where the PUC would see someone sufficient and we don't, or the other way around. But at the end of the day, from the CAISO's perspective, hopefully we clarified how we're going to do how we're going to evaluate the resources and how we're going to do the assessment. And if we see a deficiency, then we may backstop. Even if there's no deficiency on the PUC slice of day, that's not gonna impact how if we determining if we're gonna CPM or not on our side if we see a deficiency. So if it happens, we might CPM as we would do today.
Yeah, we have obviously 6 different categories of CPM. There are different categories where the CPM could be exercised under the authority. I think you're referring to like basically the collective deficiency issue, and I think that almost all the examples we've come up with would show that that problem is not going to manifest, at least from what we've seen. And I think that like if you want to sort of if you describe that you're going to tinker with the numbers, and that's what I'd be sort of curious about is like how are you sort of seeing that you would tinker with the numbers that would show that? And maybe if I'm wrong about you being concerned about the collective deficiency CPM, I think that's what at least I'd like to understand more from you, Perry, is what is that example of where you tinker with the numbers, and we would in our CPM processes for collective deficiency show that the need show that deficiency such that we could exercise our authority under the CPM. And maybe you could help me out there, Perry.
Yeah, no, I can try to run that example together for you, but I think that the broader question and I think opportunity here would be to use this test year as a way to do that check for each of the test year months, and commit to giving that type of report to the market participants. Just evaluating, okay, the CPUC found compliance in this month, and we would have seen a deficiency if that would occur, or the test year is an opportunity for you to also show that does not happen during the test year. Are you guys open to providing that kind of transparency to the market during the test year?
So Barry, I think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Jamie, but I think the PUC is planning to produce a report of the test year analysis. We are working with them to review the data as well, and we're definitely interested in looking at the data. And one of the reasons exactly what you mentioned, which is we want to see the impact of a test year data on the showings and how it would look, if we would have concerns on our side. So I think there's that plan happening. there's no plan at the CAISO side to produce a report or findings from that test year analysis. I don't think we're planning to do something like this, but we're going to look into it. And if we need to bring it back and discuss it in the working group or in any other forum, then we may do that. But I don't think there's a commitment on our side to produce a report for the test year showings.
I think that the missing information would be, what would under CAISO's calculation, what would it see the system as for purposes of determining if its tariff would allow it to engage in backstop procurement. So yeah, the CPUC, they're reviewing the data on their side according to their rules. But I think the important piece, at least I have another thing, but at least under this comparison would be to see what the calculation would be from your side, and then that should, if you're right, that should prove out that you barely ever see this kind of in practice, and I can also take back to come up with an example that would show it. So it would be good to get that commitment. I know you wouldn't want to commit to it on the fly here right now, but please consider that. That would be extremely helpful. The next question I have is not
Perry,
related.
Perry, can I just step in maybe and just just shed a little light on
Sure.
maybe issues of what your ask is, So yes, we've received the test year showings for the year ahead. We, aren't validating those based off of year ahead, or not year ahead, but off of, supply plans at this time. It's more of a validation based upon what, the various checks are. I could see in the month ahead space that we could really do it more off of supply plans to see the difference. But at that point, we will be past that February 1st filing date, report that we're required to show. And I'll also emphasize that a lot of this depends on the LSE's ability to populate the slice of day templates accurately. So we did notice discrepancies between what was filed in their year ahead, binding filings compared to the slice of day filings. So it's just really important that we get more accuracy and really, go through some of the quality control checks that we need to get, the data being reported, particularly like the scaling of the variable energy resources. Anyways, I
Right.
just wanted to put a little finer point on that it's like we hear your ask, but it's just there's wrinkles in that in getting there.
Yeah. No. I
Put
think
us all
anyway.
get us all working together so we can achieve that. Yeah.
Yeah. Any way that the energy division could coordinate with CAISO. I'm not saying it's a problem that's CPUC's problem. I'm really saying, if we're going to get into the position where LSEs are actually the local regulatory authority says the LSEs are actually fine, yet the CAISO is going to incur additional costs and procurement. We'd want to know about that, and we figured that a test year would be a good time for you all to look into that with the data. More, I'm sort of sensing though the burden kind of would be more on CAISO's side, because I am asking for data related to if they would see themselves as short and therefore be able to engage in CPM.
Yeah, and I think it would be useful, Perry, if you could give us an example of how you see that, really playing out, because I feel like the various examples we've worked through internally with CAISO staff has really resulted in it being the opposite direction, where
Right.
like you could see a deficiency at the PUC side, but really on the CAISO side, like we're being so conservative in the NQC setting that you wouldn't see that.
That is also
So
good
maybe-
information that could be included in if you were to commit to this kind of analysis as part of the test year. That kind of information would be and transparency into that information would be really good for the market.
Yeah, Barry, thank you for that. So each LSC, if they're not meeting the ISO requirements, they should know that they actually get notices from us, but they should, based on the PUC rules, they should know if they meet it or not. The ISO can only do CPM if we have an overall deficiency. So we need all of the showings together, including the municipalities. We can't CPM anything for one individual LSC. So just because one LSC is short, really can't CPM for that. Okay, so it is a much bigger problem for the ISO to get all the showings together, because these are not coming to the ISO directly into STERA. We can't use them one for one. So you are asking for a lot of uplift for something that is very theoretical that we don't think is going to happen. But we'll look into it, and we'll coordinate with the PUC to see what we can do about it. Just I don't want.
Yeah, even just the megawatt short, megawatt long at an aggregate basis is better than nothing, at least on that topic. You could give everyone sort of a sense of calm about that. The second comparison that we would ask for is to compare not just to in the new world the CPUC versus the CAISO view of it, but also the CAISO's view in the new world versus the status quo. And that could give us a sense on if we would expect more or less CPMing happening in the future than what we did in the past, given the rule change. And again, test year is a great opportunity to look at that and do that type of analysis. And it could be as simple as just on an aggregate basis, the short or the long megawatt value today, or I should say status quo versus when you do the counting with the new QC values.
Barry, this is Catalin. That's a much easier answer. I can probably answer that for you right now. Everybody's buying all the resources. There's going to be about the same CPM as we have today. It's not going to be any more for the near future because there's just not any resources left. So, but we'll look into the other one. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate the thought. However, it would be good to see the data on that, and that's really what I'm asking for. And it doesn't have to be at an individual LSE basis, but we feel that something at least at a aggregate basis is warranted in this. And like I keep saying, the test year is a good opportunity to provide that. And then we can see if you're right. I think that's all I have right now. Again, this just gets back to I expected a lot more content in that CPM section of that white paper, but I have my to-do list now, and I can go and work on that. Thanks.
All right. I think up next we have Carrie Bentley in the queue.
This is Carrie Bentley from the Western Power Trading Forum. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thanks, Carrie.
Awesome. So I hate to take you back, but the caller before Perry gave a example with a 2-hour battery, and the response from the CAISO confused me. So I was just hoping to clarify that discussion. So it sounded like Christy's response to that question, if you recall, it was at the CAISO, they cap a 4-hour battery at that, or they cap any battery, I suppose. It has to be a minimum of 4 hours, and they cap it at that 4-hour megawatt level. So 100 megawatt hour battery would be capped at 25 megawatts. But the response made it sound like at the CPUC, they were not capping it at that same same megawatt hour level. So a 100 megawatt hour 2-hour battery could be shown, for example, at 50 megawatts at the CPUC and 25 megawatts at the CAISO. And I was confused by that because it was my understanding that the CPUC was also capping it at that 4-hour battery level. even though I know maybe the optimization showing tool didn't cap it. It was my understanding that that was a rule in the decision so that there was no discrepancy between the CAISO and the CPUC on what batteries, the maximum batteries were allowed to be shown for in any specific hour. So I'm hoping Jamie or Christy can clarify that point.
Right, yeah, and Jamie, feel free to jump in too if I don't cover it sufficiently, but the QC value that the PUC would pass to the CAISO is the state would be limited by that 4-hour value. However, the showing for the slice of day tool can exceed the 4-hour value if the, if the resources PMAX allows it to. So there's a bit of a difference between the QC value and then how the energy can be shown in the slice of day tool.
So
the
not
slice of day tool for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So not to be super not to be super specific there, but you're saying the showing tool, and I'm aware the showing tool right now has that functionality, but the decision itself, I caps it at 4 hours. So and it understanding too that some of our LSE members got their test year showings rejected because they showed a 2-hour battery at that 2-hour level. So maybe you can clarify whether that's just a tool issue or a rule issue.
Yeah, Jamie or Kelsey, do you want to jump in there?
I'll punt this to Kelsey. Kelsey, if you could hop in here.
I'm sorry, I was not aware that an LLC had their showing rejected. Elisha, can I ask you if that was the case and what was the nature of it again?
Just to be clear, it's less about whether an individual LSE had their rejected, but is there a rule that says an LSE can only show it at their 4-hour value, not the PMAX, not the 2-hour value? I know the showing tool allows that, but in the decision, the way I read it, it's still capped and they're not supposed to show more than their 4-hour value.
Yeah, sorry, Carrie, I'm gonna have to go back and take a look at that. My initial thought was that it was the 4-hour, like you said, but I'm just gonna have to check.
I'm not aware of a showing being rejected having to do with only 2 or like 2 versus 4 hours. That might have been before I started working on that. But also, my understanding is that if a battery is 2 hours versus 4 hours, then we apply it as if it were less. But like if it's we divide the amount of megawatt hours by 4. So we kind of reinterpret it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that's my understanding. And I think that's what the decision says, which means the caller before and the discrepancy they were pointing to doesn't exist. Because if you even cap a 2-hour battery and you reinterpret it as a 4-hour battery, then it should look the same between the CAISO and the CPUC. So maybe we could just get some full transparency around that. Yeah. Sorry, Christy, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I agree with you. If that is the case, then there wouldn't be a discrepancy. But yeah, we should reconcile with the PUC and then we can clarify in this document
Okay.
The rule.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. Next in the queue, we have a question from Jay Strickland.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Thanks, Jay.
Great. Hey, everybody. My name is Jay Strickland. I'm at the Energy Authority. And my question is regarding Flex RA. Just wanted to see if there's consistency with how we're saying, if you're compliant under the CPUC, you're probably compliant under the CAISO. For system, is that also apply for Flex, where if someone's compliant under Flex under the CPUC per the showing template, then they're probably also compliant under the CAISO.
I think just to kind of go back a little bit, I don't think we're saying if you're compliant at the CAISO, it means you're compliant at the PUC or vice versa. I think we're saying there will be two compliance / assessments happening independently, one at the CAISO, one at the PUC. And if you're jurisdictional, then you probably want to pass both of them. So there's no tying there, I think, and that applies, yes, to your second question. It applies to flex RA. There's no, actually, I'm not sure if the PUC does a flex RA check, but definitely, if you pass the flex, you need to pass the flex RA at the CAISO at least, the flex RA compliance check, which is not impacted at all by this process. So we didn't talk much about it here. So hopefully that answers your question. Jade, does that make sense?
And Abdul, I'm just gonna jump in here and clarify that, yeah,
Yeah,
CPUC does have a flex requirement. The flex requirement should be the same as it is at the CAISO. Given that, CPUC gets a portion of the total flex requirement and the allocations go back to CAISO,
right,
the way that we allocate it. And the requirements should be identical, and the counting methodologies are, I believe, identical. So I'm not seeing any issue with that. I think the challenge with the system aspect is that, unlike Flex, the system will now have 24-hour values, so it's a little different.
Okay, that makes sense. Because it should all be 1 for 1 for Flex. But I'm sorry, was I not following that earlier correctly then, that when there were earlier questions around if someone is compliant or meets their system requirements per the CPUC requirements, that and especially in aggregate, that the system, if everyone's covered under the CPUC requirements, that they're probably going to be covered under the CAISO, and that the CAISO is probably not going to have to backstop. That's kind of the narrative I was following earlier. Is that not an accurate summary?
Yeah. I think the word probably is key here. So once you add the word probably, I think the discussion that you're talking about, I think with Perry and the other folks, we think that, yeah, passing at the PUC will most likely result on passing at the CAISO as well. Not necessarily the other way around, but it's just expectation based on kind of experience and stuff. It's not a rule though. So if you pass at the PUC, doesn't mean necessarily you will pass at the CAISO or the other way around. You need to pass at both based on each entity's rules.
And then to your second part, I think we kind of touched on it in an earlier discussion, but the backstop, right? That, we would backstop based off of if there's an aggregate deficiency, not individual LSC. So an individual LSC individual LSC being sufficient at the PUC and the CAISO does not imply that there's no backstop at all.
Right.
So I don't want to, make that an if then that is guaranteed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes sense. The key word there being probably. So yeah, I would like to echo what Perry had raised, that since we are having the test year and we are looking at that, it would be useful if even it was a very cursory or high level look at that assumption from experience, and just having even a short comment in the CPUC report on either the filing or the final one that comes out after the test year. I think that would be useful information just to get the CAISO's perspective. But that's all I have. Thank you guys for hosting this. I appreciate you taking questions.
Yeah, we appreciate hearing from you. And please, again, reach out if you have additional questions about the white paper. So, all right. And Grant from MNH, I see you have your hand up again, and you also asked, do LSCs have to pass a QT showing and a 24-hour showing I think the answer is, under slice of day at the CPUC, LSEs will have to pass that showing formats, and then there's kind of the continued, as it is today, there's the stack-based showing at the CAISO. I don't know if you had an additional question, but hopefully that helps.
Sure, yeah, that helps with the one in the chat. I did have an additional question on another matter. So if it's all right, maybe I'll move to that one. This is a little bit more general, higher level. I'm curious if CAISO and or CPUC do any sort of hourly reliability risk modeling. Here I'm thinking about like some sort of, system-wide stochastic modeling where the results of which might include like heat maps where you expect to see loss of load or expected unserved energy, specified by hour and season or month? And if so, is any of that modeling publicly available?
So I can speak for CAISO and then turn it over to Jamie, because yes, I know each do respective modeling, but so I'll answer in kind of two parts. So we do stochastic modeling as it relates to kind of IRP portfolios, and then we have been kind of incorporating that into our summer assessment. But there is an ongoing RA working group that's specifically dedicated to stochastic modeling with more of an RA focus, and so those working groups are ongoing right now. So if you're not plugged into those, those analyses will be kind of developed in that working group process.
To confirm, that's the RA framework and program design?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And then Jamie, did you want to add anything as far as PUC?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the LLE study process that we do at the CPUC, both in the IRP and RA proceeding, but I could point you to the prior RA rulemaking. Let's see, it was a January 2023 ruling that released staff's 2024 RA LOE study, and there you'll find the heat maps that you are looking for that provide kind of hourly unexpected or unserved energy, it's stochastic. Anyways, just whatever the things you requested are in that report. So you can find that in the prior RA rulemaking staff proposal from last year.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. I'll just reiterate there. We have, definitely next Tuesday's RA modeling program design meeting. We'll be going over modeling, and then I think on the February 13th meeting, that's also going to be on the agenda. So, excellent. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. So, any last questions? Would love to field those. All right. Well, really appreciate everyone's engagement today, and we've got a couple take-home items, but I think we were able to kind of address many of the questions that were brought today. So thank you so much, and thanks again to Jamie, Kelsey, and Elijah for your willingness to be here today and answer questions as well. So I think Brenda will have a couple closing slides with some contact information if you have additional kind of one-on-one questions for us with the CPUC. So Brenda, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And so for the closing remarks, I didn't prepare that last slide, but you can feel free to send them over to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. My colleague Isabella Nicosia is helping run these calls, so she's not here today, but she'll be back on Tuesday to help with that meeting that's virtual. I sent out the link to that notice, so you can see that we just changed that format to that meeting from hybrid to virtual. So thanks so much for those questions that were re-asked during the call. So that call for January 16th will be virtual. at this time. We do have a news release here to provide as an update for the ISO. The FERC accepted the ISO tariff changes for the Western day-ahead electricity market. So these new rules are adapted to the day-ahead market enhancement as well as extended day-ahead market as well. So it's a good little news release that provides a few links, and feel free to check it out. There's a lot of information on that news release for us to do. But other than that, thanks so much for today's call. This call will be it was recorded and will be posted within 3 to 5 business days. And we apologize for the beginning part of our technical issues as we work closely with Inteller, our vendor, to make sure that doesn't happen again. But thanks so much. We did a great job, and thanks to the team that's at the ISO right now helping with this, and also the CPUC folks that were able to join us as panelist group. So with that, Silas, I will pass it back to you to close our call. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
That does conclude our call. Thank you all so much for joining, and you may now disconnect.